On behalf of the National Transit Institute, I welcome you and thank you all for participating. The National Transit Institute develops, promotes, and delivers training and education programs for the public transit industry in the United States. Today's webinar is based on National Transit Database 2021 Safety and Security Rail Mode Reporting. We are so pleased to have as our presenters today, Ann Singleton, NTD Senior Safety Analyst and Safety Team Lead, James Overbeek, NTD Validation Analyst, and Dylan Cullifer, Junior Safety Analyst. During today's session, you can ask your question at any time during the presentation, preferably, please, by putting it in the Q&A box. People tend to put things in the chat box, and depending on how active the chat is, we may miss them. So the Q&A box is a good place to have a single source where all the questions are. You can see open questions. You should be able to see the answered questions that were typed. The other questions we might do live at the end if there's time. So please take a minute, find your Q&A box, and put your questions in there. You should have been emailed a copy of the presentation handouts. I will put a link, 2 links actually, in the chat box so that you can have that if you don't already have a copy. I'll do that in a minute. And just keep in mind, you should be getting a survey probably tomorrow about this webinar, and we really appreciate your input and ask that you take a couple minutes to fill that out for us. I think that's it for my housekeeping. I will be in the chat box to assist if anyone needs anything. And now I'm going to turn the presentation over to Ann.
Thanks, Lori. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. The goal of today's session is to familiarize NTD reporters with the safety and security reporting requirements and the individual reporting forms. As always, we hope that the knowledge you gain today will make your job easier, and we sincerely appreciate your commitment to safety and security reporting. For those of you that report for purchased transportation providers, excuse me, known as depicted as PT in the system, please share this presentation with them so that they too are aware of what you need to report to NTD. So today we're going to show you how to access the NTD system and navigate through the various menus and forms. We'll also discuss how setup is achieved and review the safety package, navigation, and features. And then we will go through reporting on each of the 4 safety and security reporting forms, including a typical collision report. As mentioned, James, Dylan, and I are your instructors for today. Joe Eldridge, the NTD Operations Center Manager, and Thomas Coleman, the NTD Program Manager, will not be joining us today. So here's our contact information. We're going to share this again at the end of the session. Your assigned safety analyst's contact information is also displayed on several screens within the NTD system. If you do not know who your safety analyst is, please feel free to contact any of the 3 of us for assistance. So first we'll have a brief overview of the NTD program, and then we'll discuss the website and go through navigation. In 1974, Congress established the National Transit Database program as the means to collect information and statistics on transit systems in the United States. The first data was collected in 1979 via paper reports. Since then, the NTD has evolved into the nation's primary source for information and statistics on transit systems. The data reported to NTD is used in a variety of ways to include publicly available data products, which are published monthly, which can be used for peer review, for example, industry performance reports to Congress and other federal agencies or departments, and the formulation of national policy. The data is also used to direct, support, or improve other FTA program initiatives and is used to factor federal funding allocations. Agencies that are recipients or beneficiaries of Urbanized Area Formula Funds, 5307 and 5311, are required to report data with some exceptions. Both public and private providers are encouraged to voluntarily report, as this will increase the federal grant allocation for that urbanized area. All reporters designated as full reporters in the system are required to report monthly safety and security events that meet a threshold. Agencies designated as small systems or rural tribal reporters report safety and security data on an annual basis. How do we validate your data? SNS 40 forms are read by the analyst to compare the event description against the data points. In addition, all forms are periodically run through various system validation processes to look for common issues. If the analyst has questions or requests corrections, the analyst typically returns the form or report to the agency, but may also call or email reporters. Once corrections are made, the analyst reviews the form for accuracy and approves the form. The various forms and reports have specific deadlines. The SNS 50 monthly summaries are due on the last day of each month for the previous month's data. For example, the March report would be due by April 30th. NTD sends automated email. Well, I shouldn't say that. I was just about to say that we send automated email reminders, which you see it says here on the 20th of month. But we've just determined that those aren't actually going out. So we will be putting in what we call a ticket to correct that, and then you will start seeing reminders. But they'll probably go out about the 25th of the month. Anyway, so that's coming. But currently, NTD does send automated late notices on the 1st and the 5th of each month if your data has not been submitted. Please note that a report that has been saved but not submitted is considered late. If you get a late notice, please check to ensure all of your reports are submitted. And if you still have a question, you can certainly contact your safety analyst. If the form or report is not submitted by the 15th of the month, a third late notice is sent by your analyst. If there are extenuating circumstances why you cannot report, medical leave, vacation, whatever the case may be, please advise your safety analyst. The major event report, SNS 40, is due no later than 30 days after the date of the event. Failure to report required NTD data can have severe consequences and could affect the agency's annual program funding grant. A failure to report can be submitted by the analyst to FTA for a variety of reasons, as you can see listed here. Please remember to submit reports and respond to analyst inquiries in a timely fashion. This is a screenshot of the National Transit Database homepage on the Federal Transit Administration website. On the left-hand side, indicated by red arrows, are several links that we're going to discuss in the coming slides. The first of these links is about the NTD. This option contains an overview of the NTD program, contact information, and help desk contact information. The NTD data option provides access to published data products, including the safety and security time series files, the current annual data and profiles, monthly ridership statistics, and the National Transit Summaries and Trends document, just to name a few. Under reference materials, you will find the NT glossary, policy manuals, quick reference guides, information on training and conferences, and more. Accessing the NTD program, you would click on either the NTD reporting tool or the reporting login selection to access the NTD reporting modules. Your business email address in all lowercase letters is used as your login. Users can change their password as often as they like, but the system requires a password change every 60 days. Passwords must be at least 12 to 20 characters and be comprised of at least one uppercase letter, one lowercase letter, one number, and/or a special character, any 3 out of the 4. If a user ID has been inactive for 60 days, the system will lock the ID. If you're locked out, you may try and gain access by clicking on the Reset Password link. If you gain access but you do not see your usual selections, you can try an unlock request from the Actions menu or contact the NTD Help Desk, your annual or safety analyst for assistance. The agency's user manager establishes a person's user role in the system. The user manager is also the point of contact if you need to have your user role changed. A person must be uniquely identified in only one role. There are 6 access levels for NTD reporting. The CEO, CEO delegate, and NTD contact and editor contact have the highest level of access and full functionality to include all NTD annual forms, monthly ridership forms, and safety and security forms. CEOs and delegates can also submit the agency's certification forms for both the annual module and the safety and security module. The safety contact has full function access to all safety and security forms. The safety contact will also receive the reporting reminders once we get those going, and also will receive the late notices. The safety editor cannot submit or delete reports. Safety viewers can only view safety and security forms. Okay, so once you have clicked on that login tool, then the first screen that appears is shown here on the left, just your disclaimer. And once you agree, you'll see the screen that's on the right-hand side of this slide, where you enter in your username and your password. And again, as I mentioned, you'll see a forgot password, or you might see a reset password link down there as well. With the launch of the new Sites interface last September, the first screen to appear will be similar to this screenshot. However, you may have different options based on the sites you have access to. On this screen, you can bookmark NTD by clicking on the star. That way, this screen will only appear again if there's a system notice which you must acknowledge. It's essentially a bookmark. Okay, so once you complete the login and you're in NTD, you will see the default home screen that's shown here in this snapshot. You will notice there are menu options in the blue bar across the top, which we will discuss more on the next slide or two. Beneath the FTA logo are the different modules that you can access in NTD. In this case, annual, monthly, safety, and profile modules. The tasks menu shows you how many tasks are in your queue. Tasks are things that you need to do. For example, one of the tasks you may have is to manage any pending or incomplete safety and security reports that you have started but did not finish. The Reports tab will display reports that are available to you. First, click on the category, and in this case, you would click on Reports, and then you click on Safety. There's 2 reports that you may find helpful here. One is the Historical Lookup Report to view safety and security data reported in prior years. Another is the Rate Compared to Industry Rate Report, which will compute and compare your agency's incident, injury, and fatality rates against the industry average per 10 million unlinked passenger trips. Under the Action menu option, there are no actions related to safety and security reporting, but as we mentioned, that's where you would find your unlock request. And you may see other options there depending on your user role. The grid icon provides internal access to other sites such as FTA organizations, the user management module, the SSOR for state safety oversight data, and so on. The silhouette or headshot you see is where you log out, and you can also access your Appian profile and system settings. Okay, so in 2021, we do have 2 changes, one in particular to rail. First of all, there's a new type of service called Transportation Network Company, indicated by a TN. This is a special type of service involving non-dedicated transit vehicles. Type of service is designated within the annual reporting forms, so we cannot make changes to that. For more information about types of service or the TN mode, you might want to contact the person at your agency that completes the annual reporting forms. There is one clarification made for 2021. When an agency reports a serious injury, the event description must include an explanation of the nature of the injury to confirm the serious status. Ideally, this would include keywords from the reporting criteria, such as the person suffered from a broken leg or third-degree burns, or whatever the case may be. So please be sure to put that, if you report something as a serious injury, which we'll talk, of course, more about later, please include that description of why it's a serious injury. If you don't, we're going to return the report to you and ask you to add that statement or change it to a non-serious accordingly. All right, so first we're going to review the safety and security navigation and setup. Safety and security packages are automatically generated at the beginning of a new calendar year based on the agency's previous reporting status. Modes and types of service available in the safety module are determined by the agency's P20 form. Reporting starts at engineering and construction phase and is based on the commitment date on the P20 form. However, we do have in the works a future change where there will actually be a position to add in engineering and construction phase start date, but it's not currently built in yet. If you see any unexpected changes in the modes and types of service you have, or any questions about the modes or type of services you see in your safety package, again, contact the person that submits the annual reporting data. If you don't know who that is, again, you can contact one of us or your annual validation analyst. We urge you to not attempt to try and modify the P20 profile and change modes, because any changes that you make there can affect all aspects of NTD reporting, not just safety and security, and it can cause information to be deleted from the system. The safety packages you have access to give you access to all the forms that you have access to. So the SNS 20 CEO certification form, the SNS 30 security configuration form, the SNS 40 major event report form, and the SNS 50 non-major summary reports. All right, so as I mentioned on the Home tab, excuse me, you click on the safety module, and then you see the available safety packages by year, as you see by example here. Right now, we still have 3 years open, but 2019 will close shortly and will drop off. When the years appear, click on the folder symbol on the left-hand side for the year that you want to open. You may also notice, excuse me, I'm sorry, something in my throat. You may also notice there's a pencil symbol on the right-hand side. And right now, this pencil functions, but not as it's supposed to. It's supposed to be a shortcut, so it's really not going to save you much time at this point. So you can just use the folder on the left-hand side. We are working on that, and it'll be corrected pretty soon. All right, so when you click on the folder that we just talked about, it opens what's called the summary view, the safety summary view. This is also referred to as the landing page. The screen shows the reporting year, your agency ID number and name, your validation analyst's name and email address, and shows the safety and security reporting period, which is always a calendar year. Below the word safety forms, you'll see there are 3 filter boxes that allow you to limit the forms you see that's in the table below that. These filters allow you to view the forms by form name, by mode, or by form status. You can also use the browser's find feature by doing a Control F, for example, and enter in a major event report number to locate that specific report. However, your screen has to be on the correct page. May not be a problem for everybody. All the reports may fit on one page, but larger agencies might have many screenfuls of reports. In the form table, you can sort by any of the columns that you see by clicking on the column heading name. A double click on the column heading will do a reverse sort. Again, this is just a summary view. You can't actually edit or create any forms from this screen. To edit or create, you want to click on the NTD Safety Forms button located in the upper right-hand corner. All right, so once you click on that NTD Safety Forms button, it takes you to the dashboard. It looks very similar to the summary view, except here you have full functionality for editing and opening reports and creating reports. To create a new major event report, you would click on the File New SNS 40 button. To open an existing form, you would click on the blue form name, such as you see here where it says Security Configuration SNS 30. Just like your summary view, this screen can also, this view can also be filtered and sorted, just as we discussed on the summary view. So the first form we're going to review is the SNS 20 CEO certification form. The CEO certification form is the CEO's confirmation of the accuracy of the safety and security data reported for the calendar year. The form becomes available on January 15th of each year in the previous year's reporting package. Excuse me, so in January 2020, the 2021 safety and security package, the CEO certification form will open up in the 2021 package. I can't talk today. Sorry. I think you get what I mean. The form automatically calculates all of the data submitted for the year, which takes it a moment to open. Unsubmitted reports will not be included in the SNS 20. The form is due by the end of February of the following year, and only a person logged in as the CEO or CEO delegate can submit the form. Late notices are sent to the CEO on March 1st. There is a notice that goes out on the 15th of January. We email everyone and let everyone know that the CEO certification form has launched. Reporters should review their data to ensure that it matches the numbers in the SNS 20 form. Agencies could also use any available in-house reports to help verify the data. The historical lookup report that we mentioned earlier, you may find helpful. If the statistics on the SNS 20 form do not match your findings, again, check to ensure that all the safety data reports have been submitted. If you need to make a modification, you can add or delete SNS 40 or 50 entries, and then resubmit the forms, and the SNS 20 will automatically recalculate upon opening. You or your CEO will check the confirmation boxes, and then the CEO can click on Submit. Once the form has been submitted, even if you make changes, the form cannot be resubmitted. So this is a snapshot of the SNS 20 CEO certification form. You'll probably notice that this is just a sample form, so that's why you see these the CEO name and the reporter name and things like that are just test samples here. All right, so that's the SNS 20 form. It's probably the simplest form we have in the system and the easiest to use. So now let's talk about the security configuration forms. The SNS 30 security configuration forms collect the number and type of security personnel employed by or contracted by your agency. One form is generated for each mode and type of service you operate. The form is completed once at the beginning of the calendar year, and you are not required to update this form during the year. All SNS 30s must be completed and submitted to enable reporting. You cannot create an SNS 40 or edit an SNS 50 until all the SNS 30s are submitted. All SNS 30 forms should be completed by the end of February, and that's because that's when your January data is due by, even if you do not submit SNS 50 reports, which applies only to commuter rail modes and the Alaskan Railway. This is a snapshot of the SNS 30 form. Notice you have a place to enter the primary number of security personnel and a place to enter the total number of security personnel, which is the sum of the primary and secondary personnel added together. Please do not leave either of these boxes blank. Below the quantity boxes is a list of the seven types of security personnel with 2 columns to identify whether it's the primary or secondary type. The primary security force is one that routinely responds to events and or is assigned to patrol transit agency property. You may only choose one primary type. The secondary security force is personnel who occasionally responds when the primary force requires assistance. You may select multiple secondary forces. If anytime you use local police non-contracted as a selection, always use a count of 0. The number of personnel is reported in full-time equivalent hours. So 1 FTE equals 1 person working a 40-hour week or 2,080 hours per year. Prorate the number of personnel if the person works only part-time providing transit security, or they provide security for more than one mode. 1 SNS 30, again, is completed for each mode and type of service. Be careful not to double count personnel. The number in the total number of security personnel box from each SNS 30 that you have should equal the total number of transit agency security personnel. In the example you see here, the bus mode in B has a total FTE of 1.5. The light rail mode has 3.0, and the demand response mode has 0.5. So added together, that means this transit agency has a total of 5 full-time security personnel. If your security force covers multiple modes, you may use any reasonable method for determining FTEs. That may be modal ridership or the number of employees covering a mode. If an agency contracts for security and pays a monthly fee based on services used, they should determine FTE based on the previous year's total hours worked, which is reported into the NTD system by the annual reporter from your agency. NTD, again, allows for only one primary personnel type. If your agency has more than one type of personnel it considers primary, report the security force with the largest number of personnel as the primary and the smaller force as secondary. If you have any questions about SNS 30s, you can certainly check the Safety and Security Policy Manual, or you can contact any of us at your safety contact for more assistance with that. All right, so let's take a look at the SNS 50 non-major monthly summary forms. First of all, the definition of a reportable event is, as you can see, an event occurring on the transit right-of-way or infrastructure, at a transit revenue facility, at a transit maintenance facility or rail yard, during a transit-related maintenance activity, or involving a transit revenue vehicle. These non-major safety events must meet the single injury only threshold and are related to falls, electric shock, maintenance worker injuries, etc. If the safety event results in multiple injuries, the event is bumped up to a major report. The SNS 50 form also collects the number of non-major fires where there's no evacuation, no injury, no fatality, no property damage threshold met, but the fire still required suppression. And based on some questions we had on Tuesday, the act of suppression can be by any means: stamping it out with your foot, pressing the button on the system to suppress it, the system automatically engaging in suppressing it. It just has to be suppressed in some manner to be considered a fire. There are some exclusions to the non-major events, which are events occurring off transit property where persons or the objects come to rest on the transit property after the event, such as like a person may be struck by a vehicle and they're thrown and they land on the tracks. That would be excluded. OSHA events occurring in administrative buildings, and also transport of an individual solely due to intoxication. So if they fall onto the tracks, you know, in your station and they were injured because they were drunk, or intoxicated, I shouldn't say that word, intoxicated. Well, now they've injured themselves. So, and that's now becomes a reporting threshold. So this is just if they're, you know, intoxicated and disorderly, things like that would be excluded. On the form, you would enter in the number of safety events and the matching number of injured parties. Remember that injured means, for the SNS 50 form we're talking about, means that a person must be transported away from the scene for medical attention regardless of whether or not they appear injured. And then there's several examples here. And again, transport can be by any means. It just excludes someone walking away, for instance, to a hospital or something like that. Okay, so here's an example of the SNS 50 form. You can see you have a section for non-major fires, and then you have your section for other safety incidents. Okay. Two of the categories for injuries on the SNS 50 form pertain to securement issues. One is called Other In-Vehicle Securement Issue. This selection is used to collect an injury where a mobility device, such as a wheelchair or a scooter, is improperly secured and the device moved, causing the person to be injured. So it rolled around, for example, and the person was injured. The second category says Other In-Vehicle Not a Securement Issue. So now we are not talking about the wheelchair being secured. This is used to collect injuries such as slips, falls, or trips that do not pertain, again, to the mobility device, but perhaps they're thrown from their seat during a vehicle maneuver. And again, I just want to interject, we had a lot of questions about this on Tuesday. Securement issue is not referring to the person being secured in the wheelchair. They've got a lap belt on, something like that. We're not talking about that. The securement issue is the wheelchair itself and its securement. Again, if you have questions afterwards, you can put it in the Q&A box, or you can talk to any of your analysts to further explain. All right, so in summary here, complete one form for each mode and type of service monthly. If no qualifying safety events occurred for the month for that mode, then you open the appropriate SNS 50 form and you would choose the checkbox that says no data to report, then save and submit. Do not include any injuries due to collisions or security events on the SNS 50 form, even though you may have considered the collision a minor collision. Just bottom line, collisions information never reported on the SNS 50. There are times when we will question data. For example, when a location selection says one of the in-vehicle options and the injured person is not a patron or an employee. Or we may also question if you put the location as a non-revenue facility or an other location and you've indicated that the person is a patron. So we'll return the form back to you and ask you to explain who this person was. Okay. SNS 30 and SNS 50 forms can be edited at any time. Some reporters like to enter events as they occur during the month, and for these reporters, they can modify the form and then save it and close it after each change. But please do not submit the report before the end of the month, because then the month isn't over, so it can't possibly have all of that month's data in it. And again, we'll return and ask. Your validation analyst reviews each report for accuracy. And again, if we have any questions about anything, we're going to return the form. We might call you or we may email you. If the return feature in the system is used, user login listed under the last modified user column is the person that will receive the email. Sometimes that's a different person from the person that actually entered the form into the system. Okay, so with that, we've completed the first part, and we're going to let James take us into going over the SNS 40 report forms.
Perfect. Thank you, Ann. As she mentioned, we will now discuss major event reporting. For major event reporting, applicability is the same as for the SNS 50, but let's review this again. A reportable event is a safety or security event that occurs on transit right-of-way or infrastructure, at a transit revenue facility, at a maintenance facility or rail yard, during a transit-related maintenance activity, or involving a transit revenue vehicle, and meets a reporting threshold. There are some exclusions to the applicability, such as events that occur off transit property where people or objects come to rest on transit property after the event, OSHA events in administration buildings, death from illness or natural causes, other events such as assault or non-transit vehicle collisions occurring at bus stops or shelters that are not on transit-owned property, unless it involves a person boarding or alighting at the time, or it involves a transit revenue vehicle. Also, non-revenue service, supervisor, or police vehicle collisions that occur while operating on public roads. The major event reports thresholds for rail modes are a fatality, one or more persons transported for medical attention or a serious injury, substantial property damage, evacuations of a transit facility or vehicle for life safety reasons, or evacuations to the rail right-of-way are automatically reportable regardless of any other threshold. All derailments, both on the main line or in the yard. Also, automatically reportable regardless of any other thresholds are collisions involving a rail transit vehicle at a grade crossing, collisions between a rail transit vehicle and a person, a collision between a rail transit vehicle and another rail transit vehicle, which includes both revenue or non-revenue vehicles, and any incidents involving a runaway train. The runaway train scenario applies only to revenue vehicles, regardless of whether they are in service or not. Part of the reporting applicability states involving a transit revenue vehicle. So if a deadheading or out of service revenue vehicle is involved in collisions meeting a reporting threshold, it is reportable. Maintenance related activities are included in reporting. Here you see a few examples of reporting maintenance related activities for your review. Less severe injuries to maintenance workers are captured on the SNS 50 monthly summary form. Here are a few types of events that are not reportable. All of these examples are not reportable because they occur off transit controlled property, such as on a city street. NTD also collects non-transit revenue vehicle collisions, such as an accident in transit parking lots with transit property or non-revenue equipment collisions. The event must meet a reportable threshold. Here are a couple of examples for your review. Fatalities. A fatality is a death confirmed within 30 days of a transit-related event. This includes transit-related suicides. Please do not include deaths resulting from illness or natural causes, including individuals found deceased on transit property, where it is not a result of a collision or a suicide. There are two types of injuries. An injured person is a person transported immediately away from the scene for medical attention, which is considered a non-serious injury. Transport may be by any means, including ambulance or by private vehicle. An injury may be deemed as a serious injury, which does not require transport from the scene. Remember, the event description must describe the serious nature of the injury. For those of you that report for both rail and non-rail modes, please note the injury thresholds are different. Serious injuries are defined by the following criteria. We get many questions on how an agency is to find out about hospitalization or injury severity with current HIPAA regulations. Sometimes the agency will learn by the person or person's family that the injured party was admitted to the hospital, especially if there may be legal action. If not, FTA expects only a reasonable effort to attain this information. We are working on some further guidance regarding serious injuries. We'll update the policy manual accordingly. There are several exclusions listed that are not considered transported for medical attention and therefore not considered injured by NTD. Exclusions include first aid administered at the scene or medical attention due to illness. Also, as mentioned, when we discussed SNS 50 reporting, if a person is transported solely for intoxication, it is not reported to NTD as an injury. The substantial damage threshold. Substantial damage is defined as damage to any involved vehicles, facilities, equipment, rolling stock, or infrastructure that has disrupted the operations of the rail transit agency and adversely affects the structural strength, performance, or operating characteristics of the object or vehicle requiring towing, rescue, on-site maintenance, or immediate removal prior to safe operation. This is another item where we receive a lot of questions about. Please consider the two parts. First, the damage has to affect service. The second part identifies specific criteria, which we will look at more closely in a moment. There are exclusions to substantial damage criteria, such as cracked windows, dents, removal from service for minor repairs, and so on, as well as personal property and vehicles. So at first glance, both the inclusions and the exclusions refer to on-site maintenance and removal from service. Also, most agencies have policies to remove vehicles from service for post-accident inspections or evaluations. When applying the substantial damage threshold, consider both parts to the substantial damage criteria, that it includes damage to vehicles or objects and on-site maintenance or removal from service prior to safe operation. The exclusions from service for minor repairs or maintenance does not refer to damage in this context. Removal from service due to post-accident inspections may be policy and not necessarily due to damage. Continuing with an example of the exclusions from service for minor repairs in a non-transit collision where a vehicle hits a catenary pole, disrupting service. The repairs could be minor but still disrupt service significantly. Agencies would report substantial damage if the passenger vehicle or overhead system is substantially damaged as a result of the event. Regarding the towing portion in the substantial damage criteria, this does not pertain to towing the train, but does refer to the other vehicle involved towed due to disabling damage in order to meet the threshold. For example, there's a mid-block collision with no injuries or fatalities, yet the car is towed due to disabling damage. You would select the substantial damage option on setup screen 2. Then, from the list of damage identifier options, choose to non-transit property only. Vehicles, facilities, equipment, rolling stock, or infrastructure accordingly. Then on the other vehicle form, answer yes to the question, was this vehicle towed from the scene due to disabling damage as a result of the collision? Rail transit vehicle collisions at a grade crossing are automatically reportable. This includes pedestrian crosswalks at stations. A grade crossing is where the rail tracks and a road or pedestrian pathway intersect. For systems running in mixed traffic, such as all streetcar and many light rail systems, each street intersection is considered a grade crossing. A collision between a rail transit vehicle and a person is automatically reportable regardless of injury or fatality. For example, if a pedestrian walks into the side of a moving train and is not injured, you report the collision with the person but do not include an injury form. As a reminder, if a person bumps into a train that is not moving and is injured and transported from the scene, it is reported as a slip or trip or fall on the SNS 50. Rail-to-rail vehicle collisions are automatically reportable as a rail collision including any configuration of two or more revenue or non-revenue vehicles. However, if a non-revenue vehicle collides with a person or object including rail equipment, it is still reported as a rail collision, but the collision must meet a threshold. This table is designed to assist you in how to report a rail-to-rail collision, showing if the events meet the automatically reportable threshold and the number and types of vehicles to include. When you create a rail collision report, the collision event form requires you to enter how many transit trains are involved and how many other vehicles are involved. In the last row, you see that when a work, train, or maintenance vehicle collides with a person, an object, or rail equipment, such as a flat car, that is not attached to a vehicle, the event is still reported as a rail collision, but a threshold such as injury or property damage must be met to be reportable. Agencies are required to report all derailments, both mainline and those occurring in the yard, regardless of meeting any other threshold. This includes derailment of trains in revenue or non-revenue service and maintenance vehicles. The runaway train threshold applies only to revenue trains, in or out of service and not work trains. This includes manned or unmanned trains. Runaway train events must be reported under the collision, derailment, or other safety event categories. All evacuations for life safety or to the right-of-way are reportable, including or directed or customer self-evacuations. An evacuation for life safety means there is imminent danger to all people in that environment. Self-evacuations are where customers vacate the property without direction of the transit agency or other authority. Some examples of life safety reasons might be a suspicious package, bomb threats, bombings, smoke event, fire, fuel, fumes, noxious odors, etc. Evacuation may be due to mechanical or maintenance issues. For example, a train loses power and passengers are evacuated onto the right-of-way. However, if passengers are moved from a train to a rescue train without stepping onto the right-of-way or to a station platform, that is not considered an evacuation for life safety or to the right-of-way. As a reminder, to create an SNS 40 major event from the dashboard, click on the File New SNS 40 button. Just a reminder that SNS 40 reports due no later than 30 days after the date of the event. If you have an event that includes two or more transit modes from your agency, how do you choose which mode to report it under? If the event involved your rail mode and a non-rail mode, such as a streetcar and a bus, choose rail. The first two screens will act as a wizard to help determine if the event meets the thresholds. Screen 1 captures the date of the event, the mode and the type of service, and the event type. This is a snapshot of setup screen 1. Setup screen 1 event types. The first and most common is a collision. This includes suicides or attempted suicides where there is a vehicle impact. However, if a person is intentionally pushed in front of a train and is struck, This should be reported as an assault. Derailments are the next choice in both mainline derailment and yard derailments. If a derailment results from a collision, report the event as a collision. Agency also report fires, hazmat spills, acts of nature, and other safety events that meet a threshold. Each of these will be discussed in more detail later in the presentation. There are two categories of security events: system security events such as arson, bomb threats, suspicious packages, etc. that affect the transit system, and personal security events such as assault, robbery, homicide that affect one or more persons. The second setup screen asks you a series of questions, some of which are based on the mode and or type of service or type of event you are reporting. This is to determine the reportability of the event and the subforms that need to be generated. This is only a list. We will cover each in more detail. First is the number of injuries and or fatalities. Next is the substantial damage indicator, and if there is a substantial damage, you select what type of property was damaged. Next is the evacuation threshold question. If you're reporting a collision in rail mode, you will also be asked 4 other questions. Were transit revenue vehicles or non-revenue rail transit vehicles involved? Was the event a collision at a grade crossing? Was the event a collision with another rail vehicle or person? The last question asks if a runaway train was involved. This question also appears on the derailment and other safety event versions of Screen 2. This is a snapshot of setup Screen 2 for rail mode collisions. As with other events, a non-transit collision must meet a reportable threshold. Here are a few examples for your review, including when non-revenue rail maintenance equipment collides with anything or anyone except a train. If the equipment collides with the train, it is reported as a rail transit collision. The non-transit collision form will appear when you select the collision event type on setup Screen 1 and select no to the question, were transit revenue vehicles involved in this collision, on setup Screen 2. Based on the selection you have made and questions you have answered, the system will respond accordingly. If the event is reportable as a major event, the basic information screen will appear. If the event is not reportable as a major event, the system will generate a message that the event is not reportable and ask you if you want to continue. At this point, you can edit the selections on setup Screen 2 in case you answered a question incorrectly, which may have made the event seem not reportable. If the event meets the criteria for a major event, the basic information screen will appear next. The basic information screen displays the date you already selected. When entering the time, be sure to use AM or PM designations, even if you use military or 24-hour clock format. The approximate or actual location of the event, the geographic location, latitude and longitude is required. You're permitted to enter numbers, a decimal point, and a negative symbol for the longitude. Please use a minimum of 4 decimal places. If you do not have the coordinates, you can use a variety of internet resources. One such site is latlong.net. This is a snapshot of the latlong.net site if you choose to use it. As you can see, there's a box to enter the physical address or the station name or milepost, and the system will display the coordinates in the latitude and longitude boxes. The basic information screen also captures the event description. The description box can hold 2,000 characters. If you exceed the 2,000 character limit, a message will pop up that you exceeded the limit. You will not be able to continue to the next screen until you've reduced the number of characters. The description should be concise but descriptive so that the analyst can understand what occurred how it occurred, and should include the number and type of injuries or fatalities, and if any vehicle was towed. Event description should not include any personally identifiable information, such as names, addresses, badge or driver's license numbers, and so on. However, do continue to include ages and genders. This helps us validate your reports. There are event type checkboxes for attempted suicide and suicides. Please make sure this selection is also made on the injury or fatality form accordingly. The last piece of information is the name and phone number of someone to contact for additional information regarding the event. You do not need to enter the name of the person if it's the same as the person reporting the event. When you enter a phone number, enter only the numbers and no parentheses or dots. The field will self-format. The basic information screen is also the first screen that the progress bar appears on. This bar shows you how many subsections you have to complete and your progress thus far. This is a snapshot of the basic information screen. First, we will review the details of reporting a collision. The collision screens will vary slightly depending on selections made on Setup Screen 2. Typically, there are 4 screens or subforms that may appear when reporting a transit collision: the collision event information screen, the collision information screen, the transit vehicle involved screen, and if applicable, the other vehicle involved screen will appear. This is a snapshot of the collision event screen for rail modes. The first collision screen is the collision event information screen. First, this form captures information about the number of transit vehicles involved. The answer would always be 1 unless 2 transit vehicles from your agency collide. The location of the event, such as the transit facility, right of way, both at a grade crossing and not at a grade crossing, etc., is captured. Choose right of way not a grade crossing with locations such as driveways or parking lot entrances or mid-block events. If you report an event that occurred in a non-revenue facility, such as a yard, we still prefer that you indicate if the event occurred at a grade crossing or not, if possible, rather than just select non-revenue facility. For the collision with selection, indicate what the transit vehicle collided with, such as another vehicle, person, fixed object, and so on. A collision with a bicyclist, pedicab, a person in a wheelchair, or on an electric scooter is reported as a collision with a person. Scooters, mopeds, and motorcycles, school buses, or dump trucks are all reported as a collision with a non-transit motor vehicle. Use the other selection only when no other selection is appropriate. Collision with a transit vehicle is used when 2 transit vehicles from your agency collide. Choose the appropriate collision with depending upon if the train was in or not in service. In a multiple impact collision scenario, report the collision with as the first object impacted. For example, a train collides with a car and then the car hits a building. The collision with selection would be non-transit motor vehicle, and you would include the damages to the building and that the building was struck in the event description. Let's look at a few examples of how to determine how many other motor vehicles to report. Please note this box is not the total number of vehicles in the collision. It is only the number of non-transit vehicles involved. So please do not include the transit vehicle in this number. If car 1 cuts off a light rail vehicle, but no contact is made, the light rail vehicle goes on to hit car 2. The number of other vehicles to report is 1 because only car 2 had contact. If car 1 hits car 2, then proceeds to hit the light rail vehicle, the number of other vehicles to report is 2 since both car 1 and car 2 had contact. After the collision event information screen, the collision information screen will appear. This is a snapshot of the first part of the collision information screen. The collision information screen captures information about the conditions at the scene, such as the weather and lighting conditions at the time of the collision. The twilight selection is used to refer to both dawn and dusk when it is not full light or full dark out. Please be sure your lighting corroborates the AM/PM time you entered on the basic information screen. Indoors is not used to indicate street lights or lights at a station platform. Under rail alignment, let's look at two of the options. The first is shared with other rail vehicles, controlled access to other non-rail vehicles. You would use this selection when the rail alignment is a semi-exclusive right-of-way with controlled grade crossings for vehicular traffic. The second is non-exclusive right-of-way, shared with vehicles or pedestrians. Would be selected when the rail alignment consists of rail tracks that are embedded in the street and cars can drive over or pedestrians can walk over them in the same area that the transit vehicle travels. Neither of these options would be selected if the mode is heavy rail, since a heavy rail alignment would always be exclusive, except for two specific agencies. For the grade crossing control device selection, please be sure that the selection is consistent with the location that you chose back on the fourth screen. The collision event information screen. Be sure to choose not applicable if the collision did not occur at a grade crossing. At this point, we have completed the collision information screen. The next screen to be presented collects information about rail transit train involved. One screen will appear for each train involved. The form includes an identifier count and buttons for increasing or decreasing the number of vehicles. This is a screenshot of rail transit train involved screen. The form captures the information about the revenue vehicle, how many cars are in the consist, how many cars, if any, derailed, the vehicle action at the time of the collision type, which is part of the train that was impacted, the vehicle speed, and finally, if a runaway train was involved. The fleet involved section integrates with your agency's most current A30 revenue vehicle inventory form. There are separate A30 forms for each mode and type of service. With this integration, you will choose a vehicle from the list of available options. When the selection is made, the vehicle manufacturer and fuel type is already part of the selection, thus eliminating making an incorrect selection. Please check the A30 to ensure your vehicle is in the fleet. If you're operating a new manufacturer that is not in the A30, you'll have an option to enter the vehicle into the form. However, adding a vehicle to the collision form does not update the A30 form itself. If you have questions about an A30, please contact the person at your agency who completes the form. This is a screenshot after clicking on the existing fleet button. This is the button used to retrieve the vehicle from the A30. The grid displays the available options from your A30 for the mode you are reporting with columns representing pertinent data. Some agencies may have many selections, so you can use one of the 4 filter boxes to reduce the grid to show only certain ID numbers, certain vehicle types, or vehicle manufacturers. To select a vehicle from the fleet, click on the checkbox located to the left of the option. Then click on the Add Fleet button at the bottom of the subform. Once the selection is added, the total vehicles and active fleet vehicles columns shown here will disappear and the agency fleet ID will appear. This data point would be more beneficial as part of the record and for reporters for vehicle identification. If the vehicle is not listed with the existing fleet, the user may add a new vehicle by clicking on the New Fleet button. The grid will display drop-down boxes to select a vehicle type, vehicle manufacturer, and vehicle fuel type. These are lists of all possible options unrestricted to the agency's A30. After making your selections, click on Add Fleet. Please do not use this selection if your vehicle is listed in the existing fleet list. This is a screenshot after clicking on the Add Fleet. If you need to make a correction, click on the red X under the Remove column heading and start over. This form captures the number of cars in a train, and the number of cars derailed. The vehicle action at the time of the collision, was it stopped, turning, etc., and the collision type is captured. This is the part of the train that was hit and is reported from the viewpoint of the train. This diagram shows the impact points, which are reported from the point of view of the transit vehicle. Other front impact is used when the front of the vehicle is impacted, but not when it would be considered head-on or rear-ending. An example would be the front corner bumper hits another vehicle or object while turning. This would not be the part of the bumper on the side, but on the front. Likewise, other rear impact is used when the transit vehicle is impacted on the rear, but not when it would be considered rear-ended. An example would be if the transit vehicle was backing up and hit a utility pole. Please remember, rear-ended and rear-ending are always reported as a pair. Multiple vehicle accidents or chain reaction accidents can be a challenge to report. Remember to consider the first impact or collision type in your analysis. In this diagram, vehicle 1 would be reported as rear-ending. It's doing the hitting, which means that vehicle 2 was rear-ended, which then caused vehicle 2 to be pushed into vehicle 3, the transit vehicle, which would also be reported as rear-ended. You also report the actual or estimated speed of the transit vehicle at the time of the collision. The last question confirms if the collision involved a runaway train. If yes, then there will be a selection to indicate the location of the operator at the time. If you indicated on the collision event screen that another vehicle was involved, the other vehicle information screen will appear. This screen gathers information about the non-transit vehicle involved in the collision. If more than one other vehicle is involved, you will need to complete one other vehicle involved information form for each motor vehicle involved. Vehicle counts are included on the forms as well as options to add or remove vehicles. This is a screenshot of the other vehicle involved screen. This form also collects the type of other vehicle. When reporting a collision, the other vehicle screen has a selection for commercial rail or Amtrak vehicle. The automobile option would be used for both cars and passenger vans, like a Dodge Caravan, for example. The action or physical movement of the other vehicle at the time of the collision is also collected. Just as when reporting the transit vehicle collision type, you are indicating the part of the vehicle that was hit from the point of view of the other vehicle. This concludes the collision information screen. The form includes the question, was this vehicle towed from the scene due to disabling damage incurred as a result of the collision? Answer yes or no accordingly. Please do not select yes if the vehicle was towed because the operator was taken away or just wanted it towed. Tow must be due to disabling damage, even though that may only be a flat tire. If your event includes an injury or fatality, you'll need to complete a screen for each person. This form also includes a person count and buttons for increasing or decreasing the number of people. Person type location categories are divided into two groups, persons outside the vehicle and persons inside the vehicle. Transit vehicle rider is the correct choice for passengers boarding or alighting and for people in train surfing or riding between cars. Pedestrians walking along road also includes walking along rail tracks. Pedestrian other is the best choice for people sitting, standing, laying on tracks. The injury form includes selections for the nature of the injury, serious or non-serious, and there is a checkbox to indicate if the person was transported. Remember, a seriously injured person may not have been transported from the scene. A non-serious injury requires transport. Again, the nature of the serious injury must be described in the event description. The form also includes an attempted suicide and a trespasser checkbox on the injury form, and a suicide and a trespasser checkbox on the fatality form. Please be sure to select the location and all the checkboxes accordingly. Trespassers are people in unauthorized areas of the system. Just as with attempted suicide, if there are police reports, eyewitness statements, etc. to account for trespassing, please include the information in the event description. Using the word trespasser or trespassing is very helpful to the analyst. Trespassing events are not reported on the event level, and trespassing is not a threshold. Rather, we collect trespasser injuries or fatalities. Here are a couple examples in determining trespassing for your review. This is a snapshot of the fatality form. Notice the operator can be either inside or outside vehicles. Please take care to ensure you are correctly reporting the location of the operator. This is a snapshot of the injury form. Just like the fatality form, their operator may be reported either inside or outside of a vehicle, so please choose carefully. We have concluded reporting collisions. Let's look at reporting evacuations, non-collision events, and editing SNS 40 forms. I'm going to turn this over now to Dylan.
Thanks, James. We have now concluded reporting collisions. Let's take a look at reporting evacuations, non-collision events, and editing SNS 40 forms. Earlier, we discussed evacuations. Evacuations can be included in any event type, but are less common in collisions. If an evacuation is incorrectly included or excluded, you cannot add or delete it from a report. The existing report would need to be deleted and a new report entered with or without the evacuation. A person removed from the vehicle for medical treatment, cut from the vehicle with jaws of life, or transferring passengers from one train to another where the passengers are not placed on the right of way are not considered evacuations. Here is a screenshot of the evacuation subform. Okay. The first question on the evacuation event screen is to confirm that the evacuation was for life safety, to the rail right-of-way, or if either of these situations were a self-evacuation. You may select as many options as are needed. Please include a brief description of the evacuation, including the cause. The "what was evacuated" question is used to indicate what was actually evacuated. One choice would be vehicle/vessel, which would mean the train. Do not report the location of the train at the time of the evacuation. Once the evacuation subform is generated in a report, it cannot be deleted. If an evacuation is incorrectly included, the report would need to be deleted and a new report entered without the evacuation. Similarly, you cannot add an evacuation subform to a report. Reporting derailments. Of course, derailments are only for the rail mode, with the exception of Commuter Rail or Alaska Railway, since they only report security events. All derailments of transit trains on mainline track or in the yard are reported, even if the train is not in revenue service and regardless of any other major threshold. On the derailment form, you will be asked to indicate if this is a mainline or yard. Maintenance equipment such as high rail vehicle derailments are also automatically reportable. Please be sure to select one rail transit vehicle involved, even though this generates the train form and not the other vehicle form. As a reminder, derailments resulting from a collision are reported as collisions, not as derailments. Here's a screenshot of the derailment event form. As you can see, the form collects the type of derailment, where the derailment occurred, the number of trains involved, the location of the derailment, and the right-of-way configuration. Here is a screenshot of the derailment event details form, which is much like the collision information screen, collecting lighting and alignment as well as conditions. This is a screenshot of the derailment rail transit train involved form. Notice the same integration of the A30 form, which is completed just as we discussed under the collision section. The form also collects information about the train involved, including if the derailment was due to a runaway train. Reporting fires on the SNS 40 must meet one or more major event threshold. Without a major threshold, a fire requiring suppression is reported on the SNS 50 non-major summary report. To be defined as a fire, the incident must have had fire suppression equipment or personnel involved to contain the fire. Arson is reported on the system security event form, not a fire. The presence of smoke, no fire, and no suppression is reported as an other safety event. Here is a screenshot of the fire event details screen. If the fire is in or on the vehicle, including in the engine wheel area or anywhere on the outside of the vehicle, the location would be reported as in or on vehicle. Next, report the type or cause of the fire. If the location is reported as in or on vehicle, you must select the vehicle fuel type. If the fire is not related to the vehicle, choose the not applicable selection. Acts of God events are natural and unavoidable catastrophes that affect the transit environment. Select all locations of property damage, injuries or fatalities, and evacuations. You will be able to choose more than one option. For example, the location should indicate the property or properties that were damaged, not the geographic location, such as the name of a city. Here's a screenshot of the Act of God screen. When reporting a hazardous material spill, the spill must meet a reportable threshold and have caused imminent danger to life, health, or environment, and require specialized cleanup. Here are a couple examples of what is not reportable as a hazmat event. Oil, brake fluid, etc. from a transit vehicle. This would not be considered enough fluid to meet a threshold. A bleach container is carried onto a vehicle, brakes open, and the vehicle is evacuated due to fumes. This would be reported as an other safety event because no specialized cleanup was used. Here is a screenshot of the hazardous material spill screen. As you can see, you report the location of the spill and the type of material spilled. There are two categories of security incidents on screen 1, system security or personal security events. Each type must meet a major event threshold. System security events occur on transit property and affects the transit system as a whole. Personal security events happen to individuals on transit property or those boarding/alighting a transit vehicle. This is where you would report suicide or attempted suicides that do not involve impact with a transit vehicle. This is a screenshot of the system security event screen. You may notice that there is an other system security event option on this form. This would be to capture security events that do not meet any other category. For example, shots fired at or objects being thrown at a vehicle. This is a screenshot of the personal security event screen. You will notice there is an other personal security event option for events that do not fit into other categories, such as when a person is transported due to being tased by police. The final major event type is other security events. This is your miscellaneous category. These events must meet one of the following thresholds: a fatality, 2 or more injuries, either serious or non-serious, substantial damage, an evacuation, or have involved in a runaway train. Please note you may report an other safety event with 1 injury if another threshold is included. Here are some examples for your review. Please remember other safety events resulting in only a single injury should be reported on the SNS 50 monthly summary form. Here's a screenshot of the other safety event screen. At this point, we have completed all of our screens for the reportable event types. Let's review saving, submitting, and editing forms. At any point from the basic information screen on, the system automatically saves your report. So if you close the report without saving or submitting from this point on, these auto-saved reports become pending reports, which are stored as a task on the task menu option. When you are ready to complete the report, please click on the task menu option and you will see a listing of each task. Major event report tasks will appear with the SNS 40 in the title. Just click on the task and the system will return you to the screen you were on when you close the report. Complete the report and save and submit, or if you no longer need the report, you can choose to delete it instead. Save and submit options appear when you are in view form mode. This screen allows you to review the entire report prior to submission. Once you click on save, the report is saved and is given an event number at the top of the report. The report stays open so you may review it. When you submit a report, the report will close and return you to the dashboard. Submitting a report releases the report to the validation analyst for review and comment. It also notifies the analyst that a report has been created or edited. Analysts may return reports to you for questions or to make corrections. The system will send the last modified user 1 email for each report that is returned. As mentioned, the comment box is used by safety analysts to ask for clarification or request a change. It is located at the bottom of each form except the SNS 20 CEO certification form. Each time the form is returned, it is timestamped. Users may respond to requests using the comment box. However, it is not necessary to tell us that you have made the change. If the analyst asks you to make a statement, if the analyst asks you to add a statement to the event description, please enter the statement in the event description and not in the comment box. When reviewing or editing your reports, it's important to learn how to move around the document. Here is a list of the available navigation buttons, though each button may not be available on every form. One shortcut I'd like to point out is the Jump to Section button. This button allows you to jump to a specific screen instead of using the next or back buttons. When you open the report, the first screen is the Setup Summary view. This screen is the only place where you can edit the date of the event, change the property damage, or include any injuries or fatalities if none were reported. Then you would click on Next, which displays your report in view form mode. At this point, you can continue to use the Next button to navigate to each screen, or you can click on one of the Jump to Section buttons. The view form mode is also the only screen that includes the Save and Submit buttons. Please submit after editing the form. However, if you review a form but did not make any changes, please just click on Close. If you delete a report without it being requested by your analyst, please notify your SNS analyst. Not only do we need to record a reason why the report was deleted, we also track the total number of reports each week. If the quantity goes down, we must figure out which agency deleted an event and contact them for the reason of the deletion. This concludes the presentation. If you did not get a chance to ask a question or prefer to ask it in a one-on-one session, please feel free to contact your safety analyst.
Thank you, Dylan. We're almost out of time. So if anybody has any last minute quick questions, and you can type really fast, get them in and we'll address them. There's one that just came in from Jenny Kane. It says it would be helpful to have full template versions of the SNS 40 showing all inputs required by event type. I often have to coordinate with other railroads or external police departments. It would help to show them an FTA official looking template to justify why I'm requesting certain information. Is that something that's available or no?
Okay, sorry, I was on mute and I was trying to answer the question.
I'm sorry. I
had to find my mute button. I also want to address the. I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry. I also want to jump in and add one thing that I don't think we made perfectly clear, and that is for commuter rail modes, and those of you that report for commuter rail modes. We mentioned it in derailments, but for commuter rail mode, we only collect security events. So it has to be in that security list that you saw, but that also does include a collision, something reported as a collision, if that it has a cause, and it's the only thing we kind of collect causal data on, if it's a suicide or an attempted suicide. So if you're reporting someone struck by the train on a commuter rail, it has to be a suicide or attempted suicide in order for you to report that collision. Outside of that, you'd see the security types in that table, and those would be the other kind of events that you would report that meet a threshold. Okay, sorry.
Don't be sorry.
Okay, and then Jenny I'm not sure if your question was answered there about the templates. We used to have these available when we had a reporting manual. Our manual now is a policy manual. So it goes more into policy and what we collect rather than the specifics on it has each item that's on all of the forms, and it has them in the proper order of creating a collision form for that matter. So all of the fields are in the policy manual, especially for collision, since that's the most common. Outside of that, you can use this presentation, which I know you have a copy of, and you can take the screenshots from there and just put them together. It would just take a matter of copying and pasting it and creating a document like that. But outside of that, no, we do not have anything prepared, and I guess that became more of a policy question within FTA. So that's where we are with that. I did see another question in there. I think maybe it got answered. Let's see.
328.
Yeah, there was a question about if multiple users could edit a form, but I had answered that in the chat.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Yeah, multiple people can, in case we were wondering.
Okay, so I just answered that one live about the templates. Okay. Any other questions?
Last call for questions. No? Well, if you do have questions, you have the email addresses of everyone on the slide, and that is on the handouts that was provided to you. Since I guess that's it. I want to thank everyone for participating in this webinar this afternoon. It was great to have all of you. Special thanks to Anne, James, and Dylan for, as always, a very informative presentation. I'd like to remind everyone that hopefully by tomorrow you should get an invitation to fill out an evaluation for this webinar. Please take a couple of minutes. We really appreciate the feedback. And other than that, thank you again, and have a great rest of your afternoon. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.